Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we're about ready to start here. First of all, did everybody get their postcards? I know they got out a little late. Patty? Were you on our list before?
Before, but you never got.
Oh, you put one on the list out there. Better put your name and address on that yellow sheet back there. Double check, be sure to get it.
Mine just came to David.
Yeah. The gal who handles our postcards has been directing a play for Youth for Christ, and she hadn't had much time to pick up on our activities. Our speaker tonight, back with us now without his gallbladder. So we're not getting the whole general.
I can't hear you back here.
You can hear me? You can hear it? Okay. Is Major General Nicholas Kafkalas, the former commander of the 28th Infantry Division. But what he's going to talk about tonight is his World War II experiences when he started out as an honest soldier, as an enlisted man in 1939. General Smucker, no offense. And anyway, he went in at 39 and was in the 28th Division then, and went to OCS in 1942, and then he was with what they called armored infantry, what they call mechanized infantry today. He spent most of World War II as company commander of C Company, 54th Armored Infantry Battalion, in the 10th Armored Division. And of course, after World War II, he went back with the 28th and went all the way through as the division commanding general. So with that, General Kafkalas. Podium is yours, sir.
All right. Well, I'm glad to be here tonight. I would have been glad to be here there in August. As I said, August was the month from hell. What I plan to do tonight is talk about not just combat experience, but the World War II experience per se. I always remember the day World War II started, because it started on my birthday, the 1st of September 1939, and I was 19 years old that day. And in effect, that war went on until 1945. So if you take a longer view of it, that was about a 5 or 6 year war, but you might look at it with its continuations as a 50-year war, which lasted until 1979 when the Soviet Union folded up. And it encompassed not only World War II, but the Korean War, Vietnam, and dozens and dozens of other conflicts around the world. The 1939 was a time when the United States, and many of you here were there then, was coming out of this funk that it had been in since 1929, when the Depression hit. In 1933, some things were done that raised the spirits of the people and gave them some hope. But by 1939, we were not completely out of the Depression then. We had a generation of people who had been through the mill. My military career began in 1939 on one March evening, the 6th of March. I walked down to the Monessen, Pennsylvania Armory, Company D of the 110th Infantry, 28th Division, and the three of us enlisted. At that time, the war started in Europe, but of course we were not involved, not directly. The president, of course, was aware that if the war continued, and in 1940, I'm sure he was convinced, once the Franks had to surrender, that we would have to get into that war. And we finally did. But it was a very tough struggle because we came out of World War I with a very sour taste, apparently, in our mouths, and there was a lot of opposition to any involvement in any future European wars. But the Japanese helped settle the issue for us, and we did get in 1941. Now, in 1939, our readiness status was pitiful, you might say. At that time, they used to say that you could take the whole United States Army, you could take the Yale Bowl football field and the Harvard Bowl football field and fill it up with the United States Army and probably have a few seats left over. We had starved our military. We had starved them. We had, of course, started to build up the Navy again, but we were not in good shape. In the National Guard, we were still, when I joined, we still had mule harnesses in the supply room for pulling machine guns. I joined a heavy weapons company. We were supposed to have 2 platoons of machine guns and 1 platoon of mortars. We had the machine guns, but we didn't have the mortars. The mortars, our company commander worked at the steel mill, and he devised some mortars. He made some tubes, he cut a slot in them, he put a rubber band in them, and we used to push down that rubber band from the outside, put a little flour bag in there, and play mortars with them. But we were coming to our coming into the real world in 1939. That was the first year of selective service. And to give you an idea, and many of you probably remember, the Selective Service Act was passed for 1 year. For 1 year. It had to be renewed in 1940. I believe it was in the month of August. It came to a vote, and it passed by a margin of 1 in the House of Representatives. Now, if it had failed, we would have had to discharge all the people who had been drafted up to that point. But anyway, we, in the National Guard, we went to regular 2-week field training in 1939. 1940, we went up to New York, up near Ogdensburg, New York, near what Fort Drum is now. And we were there for 3 weeks. 29th Division was also there, part of the 1st Division. We were absolutely startled to see the 1st Division had 75-millimeter cannon with split trails. You know, the World War I one had the solid trail. We had a big review up there, and the President of the United States, Mr. Roosevelt, Prime Minister of Canada, came to see us. When we got back from there in the fall, we got the word that we were going to be federalized for at least 1 year in early 1941. We did extra training, and on the 17th of February 1941, the 28th Infantry Division throughout the state reported to their armories, and we became federal soldiers in for a commitment of 1 year. In our hometown, it wasn't too bad. We stayed there for 10 days. We ate in the best restaurant in town. I was a supply sergeant. Most of the men went home at night because we lived close by. A few who lived a little further away, I had some canvas cots we set up there, and I couldn't understand why they were being broken. But I found out they were having guests at night there. Scandal number 1. But after 10 days, they built the armory in Menneson in the early 30s. They built it right next to the railroad tracks. And, you know, if you're mobilized, all you have to do is move out the back door and you get on the train. But that was the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad. But we were coming to Indiantown Gap on the Pennsylvania Railroad. So on the night of the 27th of February, which was a very snowy night, we formed up and marched 2.5 miles through our hometown of Menneson, across the bridge, down under the bridge to a place called La Four, and we got on the train. Got on the train, We got on the train with white sheets. We had Pullman cars. Most of us had never even, we could hardly spell Pullman, you know. But we woke up the next morning and we were at Indiantown Gap. It doesn't look, in many ways it looks the same. But, we got off at Lickdale. They didn't have that big 4-lane highway there. And we got on trucks, went up the narrow road, found our barracks. A camp had just been built. Nothing was painted. All the buildings were bare wood, and all the crap and scraps and everything that the contractors had dumped out was frozen into the ground, and we had to do a lot of house cleaning. The other thing is our cooks had to learn to cook on coal stoves. And the third thing is we, from Western Pennsylvania, were introduced to scrapple, which most of us have never heard of. Our training there began, and when we left Monessen, we had a company of about 90. We had 90 enlisted men, and we had 4 officers. But our company commander was on special duty at brigade headquarters, so we had an acting company commander. A few months later, we got our first fillers. They came from Camp Croft, South Carolina, and many of them were from Illinois. In fact, one of them later on left the division, probably went to OCS, and he won the Medal of Honor. He was with the 79th Division out near Sherbrooke. His name was Carlos Ogden. I always remember him because he was the biggest guy in the whole bunch. We started to get our equipment. Finally got some mortars. So we were in D Company. H Company got there before we did. So we went down to see H Company fire the mortars. So what happens, we had 81 millimeter mortars, but we had World War I ammunition, which was 75 millimeters, so they would drop those down the tube, and they would come out just like they did in World War I. They would come out, and you could see them flopping through the air like this. And they went on firing like that for a while, and finally one went down, and it didn't come out. So everyone backed off very gingerly, and finally it exploded in the tube, so we were already short one mortar. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. We went to maneuvers. Our first maneuver was a 3-week session down at Camp A.P. Hill in Virginia. We no sooner got back from there than we got left for the Carolinas. That was a big maneuver. They had several divisions down there. Some of you probably remember they had the Carolina maneuvers, they had the Louisiana maneuvers, and but this was a biggie. It lasted almost 3 months, and I remember one day we walked 35 miles. I was a supply sergeant, and I walked the whole way that day. I had to laugh because our first sergeants and one of our first lieutenants was a bit of a snob, you know, that this is where we're going to separate the men from the boys. We separated them very damn soon. It was 2 miles down the road. The first sergeant and that lieutenant were sitting on the behinds, and we went on. That's the only time I can ever remember that I woke up at night moaning after walking 35 miles. The maneuvers finally came to an end, and we started back in Pennsylvania. Many of the troops, of course, went by train. I happened to be among those that we went by vehicle, convoy, and it was a Sunday, and late in the afternoon, there seemed to be some news going back up and down the column, but we didn't know what it was. We finally stopped at Danville, Virginia, where we bivouacked overnight, and we found out that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. That was Pearl Harbor Day. One immediate effect, when we were on our way back, all the men over the age of 28 were to be discharged, and we younger fellows were supposed to stay on. But now, everybody was in for the duration, which did not make some people too happy. We got back, we got holiday leave, half went home for Christmas, half went home for New Year's. I was with the New Year's contingent, but we got called back, and the division headed for Louisiana, Camp Livingston. Again, I went with the convoy, and we went down and bivouacked at about 8 different posts on the way down: Fort Meade, Fort Bragg, Fort Jackson, someplace in Alabama, Fort Benning. Finally, last night we bivouacked at the battlefield of Vicksburg. It rained like the devil, and finally we pulled into Camp Livingston, which was outside of Alexandria, Louisiana. It was a place where all the tents had been winterized, except the tent for the supply sergeant and the artificer. We had a regular tent with they had gas stoves and we had a Sibley stove. You remember the Sibley stove? Where you would burn down a forest every day to keep it going. A heavy recruitment campaign started about that time for officer candidates. Officer candidates. I was the supply sergeant, as I said. Our company clerk was a graduate of he was from my hometown. His father owned the newspaper, and he was a graduate of an Ivy League school. He applied. We went over to apply for the Air Corps. He went in, and they took him, but they saw I had glasses on. They said, "Get out of here." So I went over and volunteered for the infantry OCS and left in April. Got the Benning. I was in the officer candidate class 33. They were graduating a class a day then, infantry officers. Graduated on the 14th of July. What they did with our class, they took a few of the older fellows and sent them here and there. The rest of us, half went to the 9th Armored Division, which was being formed at Fort Riley. Half went to the 10th Armored, which was going down to take the place of the 2nd Armored that had just pulled out at Fort Benning. That's where I went. I graduated on the 14th. The 10th Armored was activated on the 15th. We had a cadre. Officers came in from other divisions. They had been in other armored divisions and other places. And one of the first things we did was we would go down into Columbus, Georgia, where the trains come in, and these brand new soldiers would be getting off and would say, you know, here we are, green as grass ourselves, but we looked at these fellows and said, what are we going to do with them? But in about 4 months, they were already in town fighting with the paratroopers out at Fort Benning. So we had very intensive training there, and in the summer of 42, 43, we went up to another major maneuver up in Tennessee. At that time, I was a platoon leader in Company I of the 54th Armored Infantry Regiment, but I was put on special duty, and I was a regimental liaison officer, so I got to see quite a few things. Got to go up to division headquarters, watch the generals conferring, and visitors come in and stuff like that. When the maneuver was over, we headed back. We weren't going back to Fort Benning. We were going to Camp Gordon, Georgia. I had the job of putting out the guides for some of the convoys. I had 22 motorcycles, and take them out and post them along where they're supposed to be, and all of a sudden they all disappear, and I found out after the first day that if I remembered where the last place was that I saw some young ladies, I could go back and find some of them. We managed to get to Camp Gordon in good order. When we got there, we really began intensive training again. And we would spend 2 weeks in the barracks and 2 weeks out in the field. I was in Company B. The division then reorganized. They reorganized all the armored divisions at that time, except, I believe, the 1st. They left the 1st Armored Division the way it was. See, we had a regiment of infantry, the 54th Armored Infantry Regiment, and we had a regiment of tanks. But now we had 3 Armored Infantry battalions, the 20th, the 54th, and the 61st. We had 3 tank battalions, the 3rd, the 11th, the 21st. We had 3 artillery battalions, plus other supporting troops, which made up the division. And the way an armored division operated, they had 3 combat command headquarters, combat commands A, B, and R. R meant reserve, but that didn't mean anything. Sometimes you were in reserve, but most of the time they were committed just like the others. And they would take and mix and match. In other words, you would have a combat command, and he would have a couple of task forces there, and they would be made up of a mixture of infantry and army. We had to adjust to that. We had a very major maneuver right on the post early in the spring. Actually, about the most detailed maneuver I've ever seen as far as digging in. We really dug in the whole damn division. And fortunately, the ground was lent itself to that down there. And I got the worst chewing out I ever had in my life because one of my men took off his top and he had a white T-shirt on. I'll never forget him. His name was Armand Perrault. Yeah. Good guy, but he got me chewed out very well. In fact, I had to go see the division commander. We had a division commander, General Newgard, who was a real hands-on guy, a very tremendous leader. But a couple months later, in June of that year, we're now in 44. He went up to a conference at Fort Knox with his chief of staff. On the way back, they're flying in a small plane. They hit a terrible storm. They were both killed on the way back, which was a great blow to the division. We were fortunate in getting another excellent man, General Morris, who took us through all the way. On the 1st of September of 44, by that time I was a company commander. I was commanding Company C. I had been promoted to captain. I happened to get promoted on D-Day. On the 1st of September, we trained for Camp Shanks, New York. And about 11 days later, we boarded ship, and headed for Europe. Let me see, I can even give you the name of the ship. Camp Shanks, and on the William S. Black. That was one of several ships that took the division overseas. We landed at Cherbourg. Cherbourg had just been taken not too long before then. It was a mess. It was a wreck. The Germans made it their business to destroy everything, so we could not pull in with a ship and dock. We landed on these huge rafts they called rhinos. As I got up with my company there, the first guy I see on the beach is a guy who was in the Sunday school class with me back home. He was an MP there, James Fruit. We went into bivouac behind the invasion beaches. We were near a little town called Katu. We were near St. Mary Lees. We were at D-Day. You hear all those little towns. We were in that particular area. It was in September, moving into October. It seemed to rain every day. We got lots of mud. But we had to stay there until our equipment got there and we could get our equipment. Now, I had a company exec officer who was a real live wire. He went down, he got our equipment. You see, but he also got a few extras, but they found us out. We had about 4 extra Jeeps for a little while, but we had to give them up. Now, to tell you what an armored infantry rifle company consisted of, it was a large company. It rated about 235 people. You had a company headquarters, a maintenance section. You had 3 rifle platoons, a weapons platoon, and then a tank platoon with 57 millimeter guns. You had 20 half tracks, and you had a couple trucks and a few jeeps to round it up. But it was a large organization, and there was a lot of equipment that had to be unloaded off of those ships: tanks, engineering equipment, infantry equipment, signal, etc. Finally, in October, on the 25th, we started across France, and took several days coming across. We had our first commitment to what you might call combat, gentle combat, on the fringes near Metz. There were two infantry divisions that were fighting to try to take Metz. Now, if you read your history, you know Metz has been a fortified place for 100 years, and it was fortified in the 20th century fashion at that time, so they were having a tough time. Our first assignment, as a company commander, we had to put out patrols down in a couple little villages called Annecy and Dorno. We were in the woods there, and we would spend time with our field glasses looking over if we could see a live German. And one of our 57 millimeter guns got cocky, and he fired a shot over there, and the Germans reacted very fast and blew out the tires on a couple of our jeeps. But we were there about 11 days. Then the division was given the mission of helping to take the city of Metz. The two infantry divisions were going to take the city, and the 10th Armored went looping around the city to prevent the Germans from bringing in any reinforcements. And that's where we started to have our first real combat experience. It's now the month of November, and Metz was finally taken, and we started to take on other missions. We crossed the Moselle River, and one of the first things we did was my particular company. We were operating as straight infantry then. We were not organized with any tanks attached or any of our platoons detached to the tanks. And one of the first places we had a serious combat experience was heading down toward the Nied River, N-I-E-D, a town called Bouzonville. We were supposed to go down and determine whether we had some rather stiff opposition going to the high ground overlooking that, and we went down in that area, and we couldn't tell from a distance whether the bridge was in or out. So I know I was with one of my sergeants. I was telling Mr. Jackson on the way over. He was the oldest sergeant in the company. They called him Pops Banichar. He and I were going down this ditch alongside the road trying to determine if the bridge was in, and we finally determined it wasn't in, it had been blown. We started to back up, and someone saw us and started to pepper us with direct fire artillery in that ditch. And unfortunately for Sergeant Banichar, he was killed there. And that was one of the worst single days I ever had, because one of those same direct fire weapons scored a direct hit on in my 3rd platoon, machine gun squad, wiped out the whole squad, 10 people. It was probably an 88. At that time, everything was an 88. Anything that fired flat and fast was an 88. But we backed off from there. We fought that battle. It lasted all day, and then we were ordered to pull back and head out head toward the Siegfried Line. The next place we were engaged was actually on the 21st. The reason I'm using this paper here is I had some smart guy in my company who made up a day-by-day almost account of where we were and what we did. And we were first committed there in the Siegfried Line, the 10th Armored. I've heard several organizations claim that they were the first ones in the Siegfried Line, but I don't know if we were first, but our history book claims we were the first to hit the Siegfried Line there. My particular company, we had the 90th Division on our right. We went into this little village of Bourg, and we up across an open field, there were pillboxes in a wooded area, and we attacked across there, and we were driven back the first day. The second day, we brought up a 155 rifle. I don't know if any of you remember World War II. The infantry divisions had 3 105 battalions, and they had a 155 battalion. But those were howitzers. The Corps Artillery had some of these long-barreled 155s, so they brought one of those up, and we tucked it behind a corner of a building down in Bourg, and it had it firing at the pillboxes up, a couple of pillboxes in the reserve. But all it did was bounce off, even though a shell that size was not effective. But we attacked again, and we got up there, and I had a little bridgehead up there, or we did, for about 5 days. We held on there. The Germans counterattacked us at least twice, once in the day and once at night. And I did have some tanks with me. And I learned how to communicate with tankers by beating on the side of the tanker with the carbine butt and getting their attention. And but we managed to beat off the attacks. We held our position there. And after 5 days there, we were pulled back again, and an armored cavalry unit was sent up there to screen, and we went elsewhere. We fought in various places. These were, sort of a battle of movement type thing. We would fight, and then we would move on. But we were still in that same general area. The next little town that we were engaged in was in the town of Pearl. I always remember it because we got some replacements there. And again, we skirmished with the Germans there. And again, we were pulled out. And this happened to be the 17th of December. I remember we pulled out, and we were having a very good meal. We were having pork chops. And we were having fun with my executive officer, because for some reason, every time he picked up his canteen cup and tried to drink, it would run down his chin. It so happened that a small piece of a small shell fragment had cut a tiny hole right under the lip of his canteen, and he was cursing, and he was very unhappy about the whole thing. But halfway through dinner, I got a message from battalion headquarters, and I went up there, and the stuff had hit the fan. The Battle of the Bulge was started. Now, this was nighttime. The 10th Armored Division was generally facing east at that time. But that night, the whole division did a 90-degree turn, and we headed north. And there was nothing done about blackout driving or anything like that. It was turn on your lights and haul, you guess what, get up there. And by the next morning, we were up in Luxembourg. Now, at that time, the first thing I had to do as a company commander, I was tasked to detach a rifle platoon platoon to help provide security for 12th Army Group headquarters. Now, they came back to me after a day or so. But the 10th Armored Division at that time was organized into its 3 combat commands. Combat Command A headed for the south end of the Bulge, and they fought alongside the 4th Division, the 4th Infantry Division. Now we had A Company from our particular battalion with that particular combat command. Combat Command B included our battalion headquarters, the service company, B Company, our medics, etc., our battalion minus. That was commanded, Combat Command B was commanded by Colonel Roberts. And they headed up, and they ended up in Bastogne. Now, you don't hear much about Bastogne except the 101st Airborne, but until the 101st Airborne could get there, it was the 10th Armored that held Bastogne. And one other thing, Colonel Roberts was basically an infantry soldier. He had been very important in our training back in the States. He not only deployed what he had there and sent people out toward some other towns beyond Bastogne, but there were people dropping back, people from the 28th Division who had been up there. The 28th had been spread out on a 25-mile front, and they were hit by several German divisions. They managed to slow them down and screw up their timetable, because one of the first things the Germans wanted to get was Bastogne. If you look at a map of the area, you look at Bastogne, you look at a map of central Pennsylvania, and you look at Gettysburg, you will see some similarities. You see a little town there, and you see a lot of roads running through it. The Germans desperately wanted those roads. Now, of course, when the 101st came in, General McAuliffe, their commander, was back in the States for some other business, Maxwell Taylor. General McAuliffe took over, and the 10th Armored Combat Command came under his command too. He was the overall man. And they were busy there until the 26th of December, when the 4th Armored broke through and came in. Now, my company was with Combat Command R, and I had given up one of my platoons to a tank battalion, to a tank company, and I happened to have 2 tank platoons in my company minus 1 rifle platoon. We were, as I said, Combat Command A was to the south, Combat Command B was up there toward Bastogne. We were in the middle. We were south of that Bastogne effort up there. The area we were in had been occupied by the 9th Armored Division. Our toughest fight there, we fought one day for a little village called Waldbilling, and in that village we fought all day, and when we finally took it, we found Christmas packages that had been addressed to the 9th Armored Division, because they had been in there before. Now, the 9th Armored did some good work up near Bastogne. They were involved. Not the combat command, but at least 1 tank battalion came back through that way and was incorporated in with what the 101st was doing. But
That was a CCR.
What's that?
That was part of the CCR, 9th Army.
Yeah, CCR, 9th Army, yeah. But we moved around. I'll tell you what we did. As I said, we moved north. We moved to a place called Strassen in Luxembourg. Then we moved to a place called Fels. Then we attacked Waldbilling. We captured it. We had a hard all-day fight. I had one officer seriously wounded that had other casualties, heavy casualties. we pulled back to a place called Christnot on orders, and we held there. There wasn't much pressure on us there, to put it bluntly. The night of the 24th, the whole place looked like a Christmas card. Here we are in Luxembourg, snow, a couple feet deep, all these evergreen trees. It was a beautiful sight. Beautiful. That night, I got a great big Christmas present. I got 98 replacements. I told you we started out with 235, so you can see that we had been bleeding some. 98 replacements. Now this is December 1944. The people back in Washington, and I guess London, were beginning to feel that this thing was going to come to an end one of these days. And one of the things they needed most of all were more infantrymen at that particular time. So we got guys come in. I had at least 2 or 3 that wore Air Corps patches. They had on their left shoulder. They had been taken out of the Air Corps, some part of the Air Corps. I got people who had been in I don't know if any of you heard of the ASTP program that they had in World War II. My brother-in-law was in it. He was studying Russian, but they broke that up. We got some people from there, got all kinds of people. Incidentally, my brother-in-law ended up in the 69th Division, and he had learned a little bit of Russian. And he was an MP then, and when the 69th Division made contact with the Russians, and there's a picture of the division commander being rowed across the river, and my brother-in-law's in the back there, and I said, that's how the Cold War began. You were the interpreter. But anyway, we got 98 men, and we got turkeys for Christmas. So, which evened things out because we hadn't seen any turkeys for Thanksgiving. 2 days later, someone realized that Third Army rushing north to help counter the bulge, that the area to the south there had been left rather naked. So they started to move us down south. The people in Bastogne were still there, and they were there until early January. But the rest of the division was moved down, and we were billeted around Metz. In fact, we were billeted in a convent that the Germans had loused up pretty badly, but there was an iron-willed Mother Superior there, and she did her thing, and I did my thing. We must have gotten along all right, because she gave me a pair of German field glasses, which I still have. But from that time until February, the division, we went to various different places. Then in February, the division was given the mission of clearing out the Sarre-Moselle Triangle. The Sarre-Moselle Triangle, of course, you had the Moselle River running up this way, you had the Sarre River coming up this way, and they came to a point, and the Moselle went on, and the city of Trier sat right up there, right beyond where they joined. And we had to take the city of Saarburg, and we were involved in the attack on the city of Saarburg. And again, it was a tough fight, and we took Saarburg. Not my company, but my company along with the other forces. As I said, usually we were fighting I was fighting with two rifle platoons, a mortar platoon, a tank platoon, and an anti-tank. That usually was, they called, at my level, at company level, they called that a team. And then next up was the task force, and then you had the combat commands. task forces were commanded usually by battalion commanders. Now this movement to take the Sarmoselle Triangle went very well, and the orders were then changed for the division to seize the city of Trier, which was an important communication center for the Germans. As I said, on the 21st, we jumped off the attack on Saarburg, and Saarburg was taken by the 24th. And on the 24th, on the night of the 24th, the infantry, we left our half-tracks behind. We're on this side of the Saar River. We had to cross the Saar River. So we executed a night crossing, paddled across in a night assault on the other side. When we got to the other side, the terrain was almost straight up. Almost straight up. And we had to go up carrying our machine guns, carrying our mortars. In fact, I remember myself trying to hang on to the side of this hill and trying to help one of my mortarmen push that barrel up. It was actually laying on the ground like this. We were pushing it up the hill to get it. That was a busy night. We attacked and we seized about 3 pillboxes that night. And this was then on the 25th, we continued on from there and we started to move toward Trier. A bunch of little towns. On the 27th, my team, we seized a little town called Overseer. We were ordered to continue the attack on the 28th, and we moved out, and we ran into a big minefield. And we stopped, of course, for a while. And I went out with my engineer platoon leader to reconnoiter and see what we could find out about this minefield. And that's where the combat phase of World War II ended for me because I was shot. I was struck by a rifle bullet and put out of action. But I managed to stick around long enough, brought up my exec officer, Lieutenant Cook, who had also been a 28th Division man. We had gone OCS together. His brother was also with us. His brother was killed earlier. And I turned the company over to Lieutenant Cook. And later that day, he was wounded. And to this day, he carries a scar because one of his arms was damaged. And the next thing I knew, I was in a tent hospital, and my battalion commander was on the stretcher across the way. So that was a bad day for the 54th Armored Unit. Another, the B Company commander was also wounded, an officer named Devereaux, who had been one of my platoon leaders, a very, very fine officer. In fact, he was a professional actor related to the Barrymores, a very interesting person. And he had taken over B Company and was doing a great job. But I was evacuated to England, and I stayed there until May, and I managed to, after I convalesced a bit, I managed to get down to London at least twice, and then I was moved to a place called Thurlestane Hall, which was a final convalescent area, and that was a place that General Patton had used as his headquarters when he was heading that ghost army that you heard so much about before the invasion. Then I was headed back to Europe, and about that time, May the 8th came. I moved across Europe on the 40 and 8, a couple, 3 days, riding across France into Germany on the 40 and 8s, went through the Rebel Duffel system, and got back to the 10th Armored and to my old company in the second half of May. The 10th Armored Division had been very wise to end the war at Garmisch Partenkirchen. Some of you know Garmisch is a great winter resort town and also a great summer resort town. And that's where division headquarters was, of course. My company was in Eschenloh. A company was up on top of the hill. They were in Oberammergau, where they had the passion plays. So the war was over in Europe. And they began to ask people, do you want to go home? If you had enough points, go home. I had enough points. I had about 98 points. But I said, I'm single. I'm going to stay in this thing until the war is over. So I left the 10th Armored Division. The 10th Armored later came home and was in September. They were over about a year altogether. But I was shipped up to the 80th Infantry Division, 318th Infantry, and again I was commanding Company C of the 318th. And we were scheduled to go back to the States, get some more training, and head for the Pacific, just like the 28th come back and many others. And after the 14th of August, VJ Day came, I decided, well, when I got out of high school in 1936, I was 15 years old, didn't have any money, couldn't go to college. Now I heard about this great GI Bill, I was going to come home and take advantage of it. So I said I wanted out, along with a lot of other people. The last mission I had as a company commander in Germany, we were sent to guard Schloss Neuschwanstein. You know what Schloss Neuschwanstein is? Have you ever been to Disney World, Disneyland? You know that castle they have, that's Schloss Neuschwanstein, Americanized. So we went down and moved down there, and we lived in an old German glider school at the bottom of the hill. And I went up, take a look, take a reconnaissance of the castle, find out the best way we could secure it. It was very interesting. The Mad King of Bavaria had built that place. That was his hobby, building castles. And in his bedroom, there was a wash basin which was sterling silver, I guess, goose. You know. Swan. Ah, that's right, swan. Because royalty doesn't fool around with geese, they think it's swan. But the most fascinating thing was to walk through the various rooms there, and stacked up against the wall 4 or 5 deep with paintings all over the place. And you could go over there, and every once in a while you'd flip one over and you'd find a Velasquez. You might find a Rembrandt. You might find something. It was a great place to have looted. And of course, the Germans had looted those out of many places across Europe. But it was an interesting place. The only thing I didn't like was the tower there. I have acrophobia, and when I went up there, admired the beautiful view, I got down as soon as I could. But that's where I left from. I came back to the States as a company commander of a throw-together company. And we came back to Camp Shanks again. But I wanted to be discharged at Indian Time Gap, and that's where I came back home and left the service. I had been in about 5 years, 4 years, I guess 9 months. So one thing that I think made a great difference in World War II is many of the people were in so long, we almost became professional soldiers. It wasn't 2 years or out, or anything like that. It wasn't you were drafted at that time, but not for 2 years. You were drafted for the duration. We have been typified, people who fought World War II, as the greatest generation. This country is very lucky to have great generations. In the 18th century, we had a great generation that fought the revolution, won the independence. In the 19th century, we had a great generation that spilled more blood than everyone else combined in order to preserve the Union and to get rid of that foul thing called slavery. So that was the greatest generation. I don't know if we were the greatest generation. All I say is that those who fought World War II, in most cases, we had fought 2 wars. First, we fought the War of the Depression, then we fought the war. And it was an experience. It was, I don't know, it laid the groundwork for us being able to survive the Cold War, the Korean War. We populated the Vietnam War because it was the children of our generation generally who fought that war. We sit in the lower ranks. So another thing about the World War II soldier, I think, we had been raised not to expect too much. We didn't expect, most of us never expected to go to college. That wasn't done then, you know. And most of us hoped that we'd get a job. When we were mobilized, I had been hired as the company, the federal caretaker for my company in Menneson. We had one full-time person, that was me. He dealt mostly with the supply end of it, and you got $50 a month. So when I was mobilized, I was a sergeant. I got a raise. I got $60. But many of the men in our company did not have jobs, and many who did were working in the mills for $5 a day. So we didn't expect too much, and whenever we got something, we looked upon it with wide-eyed wonder. And of course, I always maintained that one of the most significant things that this country did after World War II was to create the GI Bill, because if it didn't do anything else, it made better taxpayers out of many of us, moving us up the job scale a little bit. So that is one person's view of about 5 years serving. I started college in February of 46. I got a call one night that they're starting to reorganize the 28th Division, and I became the company commander of the company I had joined in 1939. So I was back in it again. I went to work in 49 as a newspaper reporter in my hometown. I turned around one Saturday in, I think it was Saturday, in June of 50, the UP wire was clacking away, and I tore off the yellow sheet and said the North Koreans were crossing to South Korea. So I was in for another 3 years within a few weeks. So that is my little story about World War II. You can imagine, I wrote the only time I've ever written a letter to the editor was last year when they were coming to the point where we're building the memorial to the World War II veterans in Washington. There was a lot of opposition to putting it down there in that mall. Oh, they're going to destroy the spirit of this, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote in and I said I didn't think they had too much to worry about. I said, if you go down where they're putting the World War II monument. You turn one way, you're looking up at that obelisk, which is what, a memorial to the people who fought for independence, to George Washington, who was their leader. If you turn the other way and look up the hill, you see that magnificent memorial there. The thoughtful man is sitting there in his chair, the man who saved the Union. Well, now they will look down and toward the middle, and they'll see a memorial to about 16 million people who put on a uniform and fought to save the world. Because I honestly believe we did help save the world from something very, very bad. When I say we, I mean collectively, the 16 million and all those who were home churning out the stuff that we needed to get the job done. The Russians win. So with that, I say thank you very much. Any questions?
I was going to say, General, we got time for some questions.
Well, I'll try to.
Some questions, Jack?
From what I've read, and simply what I've read, I understand that the latter part of December 1944 and January were bitter cold.
Oh, yes, very, very good. Yes, that's one of the problems we had. You know, you hear about Hitler going into Russia and not making provisions for winter clothing. Well, we kind of screwed up ourselves too, you know, because it was about that time that we finally started to get proper footwear and heavier jackets. And I'll tell you, I lost a sergeant. Let me tell you a little story. There was one night we were getting ready to cross Moselle River, and I got a call. We were bivouacked up on a hillside, and I had to go down to battalion headquarters. So I went out and got in the Jeep. Driver, thump, down. So I got whatever orders the battalion commander had. He said, I have someone here who wants to see you. So I went out, and I didn't know who it was. He says, he wants to come up to your company. So he was in a Jeep. I said, is he cleared? You know, oh yeah. So we went up, and we got off the road. We started to go thump across the field, the bivouac area, and the man behind tooted his horn, or his driver did, and I stopped. I said, what the hell do you want? I said, we're in a hurry. He said, Captain, he says, you may not believe this, but I'm Admiral Byrd. Remember Admiral Byrd? The man who flew over the South Pole, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, hello, Admiral. I said, it's a pleasure meeting you, but I never expected to meet you here. Well, he had a nephew in my company, Sergeant Byrd, who was the son of the senator. So we went up, and they had a few little fires there, and they're sitting around, and we went over, and Sergeant Byrd sitting there with some of the little fellows in the squad, and the Admiral was wearing sort of a flight jacket, so back, I did too. And we walked away then, and we could hear Sergeant Byrd say, that guy looked a hell of a lot like my uncle. So they had their reunion there, and then I had to take him back down. And the last thing he did before he left, he said, someone had given me a K ration and handed me a handful of, about 4 or 5 sugar cubes. He says, look, he says, take these. I don't want to waste them. He says, they're great for energy. I know that from past experience. I ended up with a few Navy cubes. But it was very, very good.
You still have them in your pocket?
What's that?
You still have the cubes in your pocket?
Yeah, still have them. I'm trying to feel. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on any combat that you might have had against the Waffen SS and how they rated against the regular Wehrmacht troops?
I can't say that we fought SS during our period. Later on, after I was wounded and they started to move across Germany, across the rest of France and then into Germany. They did have some contact with SS. They were bitter fighters. They were, they had been indoctrinated almost like the Japanese. And they had received better treatment from the rank and file soldier of the Third Reich. They had a real investment in this fight. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Your tanks, were they Shermans or what were they?
We had the Shermans. Initially, we had with the 75 on them, and then we got 76 with the muzzle brake on it, which was better. And toward the end, we even got a few 90 millimeters, because clearly the German tanks in many ways were better than ours. One great advantage ours had, they were very dependable mechanically. The one thing about fighting with armored infantry or tanks, at that time, all your refueling was done with 5-gallon jerry cans. And every night you'd have this terrible noise of clanging of the cans while you were refueling. Nowadays, of course, they're more sophisticated. They have the big tankers, the small tankers, ladders, etc. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It was interesting what you were saying about your experiences in Neuschwanstein, because what you had discovered there was a booty that Goering had positioned. You said you were also in Garmisch. Were you aware of the hunt that was going on at that time for the Nazi gold?
No,
The scandal that broke out there later?
Okay.
You should read a book by Ian Sawyer that, because he's got pictures in there, the 10th Armored,
Yeah.
how you'd taken over the casino and that was your headquarters and everything.
Yeah.
And some of the officers that get involved with this, because they never have found it.
That's where we had a great big division review down there, and General Patton was there. I had never seen him during combat, but I saw him there, and then when we went into the city, he was around there. That's the only time I was with General Patton. We had an excellent division commander. He was made corps commander right after and hostilities. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
General, I had the honor and the privilege of serving under you for any number of years. But we shared another experience. I came back from Korea, 22 days at sea on the General Black.
On the General Black.
Yeah. Averaging about 11 knots, something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't very fast. I remember one thing on the General Black. About a day out of Cherbourg, we were having, of all things, strawberries and ice cream for dessert. And all of a sudden, we got an alert, a submarine alert. So everybody went dashing out, on deck. And I said, to hell with it. If I'm going in the water, I might as well go happy. So I ate about 3 dishes. But anybody who's never been on a troop ship should try it. Huh? Were you on the 5th plunk up?
Sir, I was a commissioned officer like you. And I was served with China,
Oh, yeah.
2 settings,
Yeah.
shared a stateroom with 5 other lieutenants.
Yeah.
I was 5th buck up.
Me too. Yeah. Yeah, scraping the steps with bayonets.
Didn't get above the water line. But
You understood how your naval officers lived for their whole career, though. That was,
Right.
that was
Many of you read
pretty
this
evident.
book, The Boys from
Bedford?
Bedford.
Bedford.
Yeah. Have you read that book? Yeah. It's very, very fascinating. And it really raised, they were mobilized. They had about 90 men in their company, about 6 of them failed physically. They were mobilized. They started mobilizing guard divisions late fall of 40. they were the first guard division to be shipped to England. There were other guard divisions that had been shipped over from the North African invasion. But that 29th, reading about them, about how they joined up, how you got $1 per drill, you got paid every 3 months, et cetera, et cetera. Any other questions? I thank you very much.
Would you like to say something?
Are you recording this for the future?
Yeah, right. Well, not really. No, this is just to test my new microphone. Okay, dear, you want to speak? Speak.
I'm thinking.
Speak. Four score.
Oompa, oompa.
No, speak, don't sing. Please.
It's January 7th. Is it the 4th day of my Hershey, because I only delivered for 4 days now. So.
Okay.
There's any wind coming into it.
Okay. Say something again.
Okay.
This is without the microphone is not working now.
No microphone?
No, I have it unplugged.
Okay, where's your boy?
Right beside me. Where's his ball?
Right beside you. Ball. Gotta have a ball. Right, Lee?
In the background.
Where at?
Let's see if there's a ball bouncing in the background.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's see. What else do we want to say?
Okay, keep talking.
Okay. I'm keeping talking. I'm talking. Talking.